Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, says he believes Russia's war is approaching a decisive moment. In his nightly video address, he said Moscow was on the verge of failure in Ukraine thanks to Western weapons deliveries. And it's those deliveries, including German-made Leopard tanks, that many are pinning their hopes on in the east, particularly Bakhmut. That city has been a key battleground in the war so far, and it's in the region where Kiev has signaled it's gearing up to launch a counteroffensive against Russia. So, can Ukraine break the stalemate there?
Russian artillery fires on Bakhmut after months of attempts to take the city. Ukraine has forced its enemy to commit major resources and take tens of thousands of casualties. The Ukrainian military says it's buying time for a spring counteroffensive. Part of the preparations for that counteroffensive are happening far from the front lines. In Spain, Ukrainian troops are finishing their training on advanced Western tanks. They hope the Leopards will be a game changer on the battlefield. Until now, Ukraine has been using older Russian model tanks. Ukrainian troops are getting training from NATO forces elsewhere too, like here in the UK. Learning the art of combined arms warfare, how to coordinate all the high-tech weaponry with infantry assaults. On the front, a tank commander has high expectations. The concept and tactics of tank usage in battle will significantly change because Western tanks have a higher firing range and other capabilities like a digital information field. If this equipment is used properly, one can destroy the enemy before the enemy approaches its firing range. Analysts say Ukraine will likely mount a major attack in Zaporizhzhia province, aiming at the Russian-held city of Melitopol. A successful push would cut through Russia's supply lines to its forces further west. There are factors like weather that can only be guessed at, not controlled. Spring mud can slow or stop tank advances, bogging down the Russians and Ukrainians alike. That means the timing and the target of any counteroffensive are still a mystery, which is just the way Ukrainian commanders want it.
For more, we're joined now by military analyst Marina Myron. She's with the War Studies Department at King's College London and joins us from Munich. Marina, Ukraine's president says the war is at a decisive juncture where Russian aggression can be broken. Do you agree?
Oh, thank you for having me. As a matter of fact, President Zelenskyy has been saying it in contrast to what we're hearing from Lloyd Austin when it comes to the fight in Bakhmut. And during a meeting, General Zaluzhnyi has also made a point that Bakhmut is very important, strategically important indeed, because it could bring about the collapse of the entire front line for the Ukrainian forces. So the idea of holding on to Bakhmut is to win time, and General Syrsky, commander of the army, agrees with that because the reasoning is to try to destroy as many Russian troops as possible. And I think indeed it is a very important battle which also determines the morale of the Ukrainian armed forces. And if they were to lose, it will give Russians a spring platform and obviously victory in the information sphere, which might put the credibility under a question mark of the capabilities of the Ukrainian armed forces should Russians succeed.
Well, talking about those capabilities, Ukraine's ability to beat back Russian forces depends to a large degree on the timely delivery of Western weapons. Is Ukraine getting the firepower it needs when it needs it?
Well, right now, Ukraine is also suffering from the shortage of 125mm artillery shells. We know that in Ukrainian-owned production has started several ammunition lines, and NATO is scrambling to get those shells to Ukraine. So in terms of firepower, we can see that Ukraine is firing a lot less than its Russian counterpart. Also compared to last summer, both sides are firing a lot less when it comes to artillery. And when it comes to weapons, when it comes to tanks, we are expecting that Ukraine will be able to use them sometime at end of April, beginning of May. And how that will play out remains to be seen because of the weather, because the tanks are different from the Soviet prototypes that the Ukrainian armed forces used to do. So it will show how well the Ukrainian forces that are currently being trained in Spain, UK, and all other places can implement the skills learned and can adapt on the battlefield.
Now, Ukrainian troops have continued defending Bakhmut despite heavy losses for the reasons that you mentioned. Could these losses, Marina, jeopardize Kyiv's ability to launch an effective counteroffensive in May or June, as you mentioned?
Well, it's a great question because apparently Kyiv is not going to use specifically those forces who are now in Bakhmut, but the forces that are currently being trained. The problem is we don't know. We know about the potential counteroffensive. There are still guesses whether it will be in Zaporizhia, direction Melitopol, or whether it's going to be in Bakhmut, where the Russian forces would be weakened. The Ukrainian General Staff obviously doesn't want to announce the location of the counteroffensive. However, the problem is that Ukraine generally suffers from manpower shortage. So in terms of kind of manpower, Russia is having heavy losses, but so does Ukraine. And in relation to Ukraine, Russia has more potential. So losing those forces and having a kind of a spearhead formed from the newly trained forces, reinforced by the mobilized forces, calls into question what will happen with other locations on the battlefield where the Russians are pushing through. It remains to be seen what happens between now and beginning of May, end of April, because that's kind of the decisive period before the Ukrainians can potentially launch a counteroffensive, and this will be decisive to see whether they have the capability.
Marian, thank you very much. That was Marian Miran from King's College London.
Thank you.